Good morning, Exercise Science. It's Monday morning, April 13th. I probably won't post this until later today or maybe even tomorrow morning. This will be your final lecture for Chapter 11 on blood. Later in the week, I'll probably do a short lecture, short review for the chapter assessment, which is going to be sometime on Friday. I'll probably post that on Wednesday. Chapter 11 is a complicated chapter. It's one that I obviously wish I could be there with you to answer questions during lecture, to do the best job I can. And again, obviously, you need to make sure that if you have questions that you're going to ask me, email, whatever format you choose, but make sure you reach out to me if you have any questions. Chapter 11 is on the blood. We've gone through different blood types, blood cells, talked about the functions of blood. I'm going to cover three main topics in the next few minutes, and your responsibility is to make sure that you use your notes and you ask questions. What's on the board here is just basically a framework, a basic framework of what I would be covering if we were in class together. So don't rely on this entirely. This is a good thing to look at as you're looking at your notes. It's a good thing to listen to as you're looking at your notes. So let's get started on this. Three basic things. The lymphatic system. The lymphatic system gets its own treatment in Chapter 13. It's that important. It is touched on in this chapter because it is linked very closely to the cardiovascular system, to the bloodstream. What happens is when we force blood into tissues, and I don't want you to visualize it, blood getting forced in, the red blood cells always stay inside the vessels and the capillaries, arteries, and the veins. But obviously things need to pass through the walls of the capillary fluids, whatever's dissolved in those fluids, so they can nourish the cells and then retrieve wastes. Some of that fluid remains around the cells. It has to be retrieved. There is not enough hydrostatic, there's not enough types of exchange mechanisms to get all that fluid back into the bloodstream and returned into circulation directly. So we rely on a second system of vessels in our body. We do have a second system of vessels. You may not have even understood that or known that before. It's called the lymphatic system. Lymph is the fluid that's left over. Lymphatic capillaries, just like blood capillaries, are going to carry fluid around the body. What they do at the level of the tissue is they absorb fluid from the tissues very slowly, and then ultimately it's going to make its way around your body, and it's going to carry it back and deposit it into the subclavian vein. So this fluid does ultimately make its way back into the bloodstream. Along the way, the lymphatic system is also very important for your immune response because it carries white blood cells to tissues, helps fight off infections. So the lymphatic system, along with the bloodstream cardiovascular system, this is the delivery mechanisms for your white blood cells around the body. So that's one function. The function I want to discuss with you as it relates to the topic that you're interested in is how the lymphatic system helps reduce swelling. So when fluid accumulates in tissue, say you sprain your ankle, and a lot of fluid gets released because of inflammation, that fluid's going to build up. We call that edema or swelling. The job of the lymphatic system is to retrieve that fluid, return it to circulation. It does that normally. We see sometimes in cases of disease when people's lymphatic systems are overwhelmed or there's not enough pressure by the cardiovascular system, that fluid will accumulate, like in the extremities, in the wrists, in the ankles. With injury, obviously, the system's just temporarily overwhelmed with the fluid, and that's why we call it swelling. That causes the pressure and the pain. The lymphatic system ultimately will retrieve that fluid, take it around the body, and then return it to the cardiovascular system. So that's the job of the lymphatic system. That's all I really need you to know for this chapter. Take a peek in the notes. There's a short summary in there as well. Moving on to the next topic. Actually, in your notes, this is before the lymphatic system, but I just put them out of order on the board. Mechanisms of exchange. How do we, once we get the blood to near the cells or the tissues, how do we get materials into the cells? What are our basic functions? We talked about these already. In Chapter 3, mechanisms of exchange crossing the cell membrane. The three big ones when we talk about the bloodstream are obviously diffusion, which we've talked about a lot, osmosis, which involves water and solute, and blood pressure, filtration being an example of blood pressure mediated exchange mechanism. So blood pressure is important in that it provides a force to move things across membranes. We always talk about blood pressure. You always think of it in bad context. But low blood pressure is life-threatening. If it gets to a point where it's too low, that's going to cause your systems to fail because you can't move materials across the membranes and into tissues. So blood pressure, obviously one of those homeostatic functions where we don't want it too high, obviously, but if it gets too low, equally dangerous. All right, last topic. And this is one you're going to have to look over on your own as best you can. And I've written it out as much as I can on the board here. You can look online. You'll see some notations about negative and positive as it relates to blood types too. That's another antigen that I'm not going to discuss, because if you understand this basic part of it, when you do get to the blood typing, if you have to learn that at one point in the future, you'll be able to understand the whole positive and negative factor, which is called the RH factor. Don't worry about that. Two things you have to understand before you even try to figure out what blood typing is all about: antigens and antibodies. We've talked about these already. Antigens are protein markers on the surface of the cell. They identify the cell. Your body uses antigen recognition to self-recognize tissue and cells. That way you don't attack your own tissues. I'm going to give you a question on your test about when this system fails. Don't worry about that right now either, but you'll see that later in the week. You'll be able to look it up pretty quickly. So antigens, again, quick summary, are markers on the surface of cells that identify the cells. Your cells mostly all have antigens, and when your white blood cells interact with those antigens, they say, oh, that's mine, not going to touch it. I'm not going to try to destroy it, not going to do anything to it, it's mine. It's basically like having a little nameplate on yourself saying, okay, this belongs to me. Antibodies are in the plasma, around the cells, in the fluid of the blood, and what antibodies do is that they attack cells that have foreign antigens. So their job is to attach to a cell that does not have the proper type of antigen and either weaken it, destroy it, identify it, so your white blood cells can clean it up and get rid of it. So when you inhale a mouthful of viruses or you have some type of bacterial infection, the antigens on the surface of those cells, they have their markers too, are going to identify them as not you, and then your white blood cells will destroy them. So let's talk about blood types. In the human species, there are 4 basic red blood cell types. It's no different than having brown eyes or blue eyes or hazel eyes. It's just a different type of antigen, a different type of variation that we have in red blood cells. Red blood cells, whether they're type A, B, AB, or O, all have the same function. They carry oxygen. They're just built a little differently. It's just, again, a basic variation, which we see a lot of variations, obviously, in human cells, human tissues. So when we look at human red blood cell types, we have A, we have type B, we have type AB, and we have type O. Type A, when you look at those cells, have type A antigens on the surface. So when you look at a red blood cell, the markers, the protein markers, are type A. In a person who has type A antigens, their plasma is going to contain antibodies against B. That's just the way it evolved. Don't want to give any more explanation, especially in this format, but people with type A antigens have B antibodies in their plasma. People with type B blood have B antigens, and conversely have type A antibodies in their plasma, in their blood plasma. People with type A blood, AB blood rather, have A and B antigens on the surface of their red blood cells, and they have no red blood cell antibodies. Now, in the past, I've had students get confused about this, and I just want to mention this very briefly. When I say they have no antibodies, it doesn't mean they don't have any antibodies at all. They have antibodies, plenty of antibodies, but as far as blood types, red blood cells, they have no antibodies against red blood cells. They just don't possess any antibodies. And obviously it has no detrimental effect. They just don't have antibodies against red blood cells, human red blood cells. People with type O blood, and the reason it's not type C is because when you look at the cell, it's smooth on the outside. There's no antigens. Now, it's not exactly smooth, but the way we depict it, the way it's depicted, it looks smooth, so we call it type O, like a perfect circle. It has no antigens, no markers on the outside, but it has A and B antibodies in the plasma. So what are the implications for this in the case of the person needs a blood transfusion? So if you look over to the other side of the board, if you have type A blood, you can get blood from somebody who has your own type, obviously. That's always going to be the case. Or type O. Why can you get it from type O? Because type O has no antigens. It won't be recognized by your host immune system, by your immune system. You're going to put it into your body. There's nothing on the surface of the red blood cells to be recognized. It's like a stealth bomber. It escapes the radar. So you can give that blood to anybody, type O blood. Type B blood, just the opposite. It can receive blood from itself. Like instead of A, it can get it from B. And it can also get blood from type O. Again, there's no antigens on the surface. It won't be recognized by the immune system. Type AB blood And I put a little star here because there's special names for type AB and type O blood, and I'll say those in a moment. Type AB blood can receive blood from AB, or O. Why is that? Well, let's look back at type AB blood. There are no antibodies in the plasma. So if you have type AB blood and I give you any type of blood, you don't have any type of mechanism to attack other red blood cells. It's not a bad thing. In this case, obviously, if you have type AB blood, you can get a transfusion from anybody. You're called the universal recipient. You can get blood from anyone. That's type AB blood, hence the little star there. Type O blood can only receive blood from somebody else that has type O blood. It's that simple. The reason for that is that they have A and B antibodies in their plasma. So if you get a type from type A, you're going to have a reaction. Type B, you'll have a reaction because you're going to attack that blood because you have antibodies against A, B, and AB. Now, what's that mean, attack? What typically happens if a transfusion's messed up, and this doesn't happen that often anymore, thankfully, but if you get an improper transfusion, what will happen is the antibodies will attack that new blood type that you got in, whether it be a liter of blood or whatever type of transfusion you're going to get, and it's going to cause it to coagulate. Same thing as clotting. So that person's going to have a chance of developing a thrombus or an embolus or blood clots within their bloodstream. So that's obviously a very dangerous situation, which is why we spend time talking about this. So type O blood, since it will not be detected by anybody else, is called the universal donor. Again, it can only get it from its own type. The nice thing in the human species, 40 to 50% of human beings, I think it's around 45%, have type O blood. So it's not like it's a rare type that you have to go looking for. About half the people that come in and give donations are going to be giving type O blood. So it's not a rare type of blood at all. And it's a good thing because you can give it to anybody. But typically when they match these up, they do try to give you the same exact blood type. But just understand, again, type AB blood or type A blood can get blood from type A or type O. B can get it from B or O. AB can get it from all four types. And type O blood can only get it from themselves. If you have any questions, again, email me, take a peek at this, and be prepared for your assessment at the end of the week. Have a good day.